Welcome to the Dating After Divorce podcast. I'm your host, Sade Curry, and I believe every divorced woman deserves a romantic relationship where she feels safe, loved, and cherished. You can create the most amazing life after divorce, and I will teach you how. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dating After Divorce podcast. Today, we are continuing our Remarriage Club series, and I have here on Zoom with me, Karen Anderson, and I'm really excited to introduce her to you. I worked with Karen for 6 months in 2020 around creative anxiety, and it was some of the best coaching work that I've ever done. So I know for a lot of people, like looking at the podcast or like my posts or the work that I do as a coach, it like looks really nice and tight and amazing. And it is. But what Karen had like a front row seat to was a lot of my thoughts about my work, a lot of thoughts about my writing and me putting my work out into the world. And I had reached out to her because every time I, created something, I had a lot of anxiety around it. And she's written a book around creative anxiety. And we worked together for 6 months, and it just made such a difference in how I've showed up in the world and how I see my work and the emotions that I feel when I'm doing my work. So Karen, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself to the listeners.
Yeah, thank you, Sade. It's so funny because the work that we did together is not the main work that I do in the world.
That's true.
And it is often related. And so I am a life coach. I'm a master certified life coach through the Life Coach School. And for the past, I would say 7 years or so, I have really focused on difficult mother-daughter relationships, and specifically adult daughters, not young daughters. It was funny because earlier on in my career as a coach, and I started blogging back in 2009, and it was all around body image and weight loss and that kind of thing. And myself, and it seemed like every woman that I talked to and met, there was something with their mothers around that, and it just, having had a hard relationship with my mom, and having at one point cut her out of my life, and it was interesting because as I was sort of like trying to get back together with her a little bit, and it was happening around the time that I was doing my master coach training, and I just saw how powerful the coaching was in helping me how I think about not just the relationship we have, but like myself in the relationship, and how do I think about my mom? And it was some of the most powerful work I've ever done. And I'm like, I can't keep this to myself.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of coaching around, boundaries and that kind of thing. And then the creativity part does come in because there's that fear of, if I do something that other people are going to criticize or aren't going to like, it feels like the attachment that we are supposed to have to our mothers, right, is going to be broken. And it's that visceral. It's that visceral of a feeling.
It really is, because, the brain feels like I'm going to lose the most important relationships in my life because I wrote something on Facebook.
Exactly.
It's so irrational, but yet feels so true.
Yeah. And like, we can say all day, I know it's just my brain thinking this, but my body is like, nope, I feel it. Like, this is dangerous. Don't do it.
Yeah. Now you've written a book around the work that you do, but multiple books.
Yeah, I've written, technically I've written 3 books, but one of the books, so I have 2 books out that are around the mother-daughter thing. One of them is sort of a rewrite of a book that I had written back in 2015. Mm-hmm. And so the newer book, which came out in 2018, is sort of like an expanded, revised, better version of that first book. And then the second one is a journal for mothers and daughters to, if they have a difficult relationship, it's sort of, they can work through it together or separately. But it's a journal.
Yeah. And you have a really fascinating divorce, dating, remarried story. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask a question because I know you had connected in our prep call, you had connected some of the challenges that you had in relationships to your childhood trauma. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, how did your childhood set you up for some of the relationships that you had?
So my childhood was that and this is, I'm telling you this story like that. This is my perception, right? Like I don't know what my mother and my father were actually thinking and doing, but like, this is just my perception. So my parents got married in 1960 and I was born in 1962. And my parents then got divorced in 1965. My mom actually got herself on a plane to go to Mexico by herself. She was like 25 or something. Because she couldn't get a legal divorce in Connecticut where we lived. I still live in Connecticut, but at that time. So she got on a plane, got to like a quickie divorce, which ended up not actually being legal. But anyway,
she was serious about this.
Yeah, she was like, she had, so there was that divorce, and I think a lot of trauma and a lot of like my parents' own trauma that sort of led them into the relationship that they had. And then, even though I ended up having a relationship with my dad as I grew up, I think there was an element of feeling abandoned. And, I've also been able to sort of look back and see like, and not that it was intentional, but that there was a lot of like emotional neglect, right? I mean, yes, I was cared for. I had, food and shelter and clothes and toys and all of that, but I was very lonely and I was neglected, and again, not intentionally. I think, everybody had there was things to take care of and nobody had time for, the grief that little Karen was feeling over the loss of her father, her family. And my mom ended up getting remarried and she married a man who, again, like at the time, nobody was talking about this, but like significant trauma in his life. And it was an addicted, often violent home. So from the time that I was like 6 on, that's what I was growing up in. And, I've worked through a lot of that. And I know that I am far from alone.
Oh yeah.
On this.
Yes, 100%. I've coined the word for it in my mind. It's like chaotic relationships because there's just so many versions.
Yes. And steps and tabs and all of that.
Addictions, substance abuse, codependency, domestic violence. Like you've got all the things, but the result is that relationships just seem chaotic.
Yeah. And, what I started to make the connection to it's been more recently that I've made these kinds of connections in learning about trauma and the nervous system is that, we have that fight or flight or the freeze or fawning. Like these are all like adaptive trauma responses or survival responses as they call them. And in my early 20s, I can sort of look back and see, I was definitely in survival mode and was tending to be either in flight or in like fawning or freeze. Like I was living my life and like going into romantic relationships from that, like unconsciously.
Yeah. So what kinds of situations did you find yourself in?
I found myself in situations with men who just wanted one thing. And I didn't know how to say no to that, or I was afraid to say no. And it's so funny, again, like in light of the Me Too movement, like I grew up, my maternal lineage, a message that I got was that if a man, like if you get catcalled or groped or whatever, like that's a compliment, that's a good thing.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was like, in hindsight, I'm like, oh, wow, like that, all of that, like,
Yes. Imagine, like, that's just like, you just opened a can of worms with that thought, like so many situations and scenarios that could come from,
so yeah, so I was desperate. I mean, again, and it's sometimes it pains me to like think back to that self. I have a lot of as I said the other day in our call, I might cry because I have a lot of tender feelings about that part of me, who didn't think enough of herself and who felt so desperate to be loved, right? That she chose not so good men, or I should say trauma. They had their own trauma, right? And it was just like,
yeah. And then you got married. How old were you when you got married?
So I met this guy who, let's see, I was 25, I think. I was 24 or 25. I think I was 25. Yeah, I was 25. And we met and were married 4 months later.
All right.
And he was from Brazil, and he was in the United States on a temporary, this was like, again, back in 1988, I think it was. And he was like, had his temporary pass, or I don't even know what they call it.
Visitor's visa, maybe.
Yeah. He didn't have a green card.
Okay.
And he wanted one. And I know that back then, and there was even a movie once made called, I think it was called Green Card, where it was like, people, they arranged it with no romantic. It was like, hey, this is just going to be a deal. Well, in my case, I'm like, I convinced myself, oh no, he really loves me. And,
Right. But it wasn't.
It wasn't
real.
No, it was not real.
Yeah. How long were you married before you got divorced? Do you wonder exactly how divorced women just like you are meeting eligible men who want a real relationship and a commitment? They're doing it by dating with their core values. Your core values are the GPS that lead you to the partner you've been looking for. When you use your core values on dating apps, text messages, and at social events, you will easily connect with your true match partner without chasing, settling, or wasting time with non-committal men. I have taught exactly how to do this in the 2-hour Core Values Dating Blueprint course available on my website, shadecurry.com/dating. That's SADECURRY.com/dating. You will learn exactly how to identify your core values and use them on your dating profile, how to ask the right questions via text, and how to tell the right stories on dates, so that you attract the right people and repel those who aren't right for you. If you're ready to meet your true match, hop over to shadecurry.com/dating or click the link in the show notes. Now back to the episode.
We were married a total of 4 years, but I had decided to divorce him like after 2.5, 3 years ish.
Yeah.
And, because the process took however long it took. I don't remember exactly how long it took, but
yeah. Do you know what your turning point was where you're like, yeah, this isn't working. I should probably do something different?
I wish there were so many red flags, obviously, that I was ignoring. And I honestly don't remember a specific one. I mean, I could share a few things like, he never wanted to do anything with my family. I never met his family. And
I think you also mentioned that you didn't even get to talk to them on the phone or anything.
No. And I think he was cheating on me. He would go, he would go back to Brazil without me. And he was cruel. And I put up with, all of that for as long as I did. And then, Yeah. And, here's a funny thing that just popped into my head. He ended up becoming a pilot, a commercial airline pilot for the national airline of Brazil. But he started doing that when we were married, and we lived in Danbury, Connecticut, and there's a little airport there, the Danbury Airport. And he started taking his lessons there, like private pilot lessons. And I remember at a certain point when I was sort of like, this isn't working out, this isn't good,
Mm-hmm.
that I was hoping that he would just crash the airplane and die so that I could just be the grieving widow and I wouldn't have to
Yeah.
get divorced.
Yeah. I totally have had that thought in my
And I
personal
had
life also.
forgotten about that until just this
Yeah.
second. I was like, that was like a sign.
That's a sign when you're like,
I wish he would
I
die.
don't want this person to come home.
So,
Yeah.
it was like all of that kind of stuff was happening. And it just sort of added up to me being like, I got to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
And I hated doing it. I cried when he was served with the papers. I was like there. He was like served I don't know how they do it now, but
Yeah.
it was
Wow.
hard.
Yeah. I mean, and I think sometimes I love that you shared the red flags, because one of the things I work with my clients on is that is one of the, I guess you could say, signs or items that I offer them is like, you want someone who integrates you into his life. Like,
Yeah.
if he's not integrating you into his life, like he's not interested. And like I told you before, I dated this one guy briefly who would always cancel at the last minute if the event involved other people. So he would always show up for our dates. And then if I invited him for a double date or barbecue or whatever, he would say yes, but then cancel.
Yeah.
And always have an excuse. And I was like, wait a second, this is starting to be this is not right. So I'm really glad you shared that, because I think sometimes there's no list, there's no checklist, there's no formula. It's all of these subtle cues. And I think the more we share what that looks like, I think the easier all the other women who are wanting to go on this journey, it will be easier for them.
Yeah. And like just knowing, like I used to sort of blame myself or think, oh, like in coach language, right? One of the like core thoughts that I've had about myself most of my life is that I'm a pathetic loser. I have let that go. My brain sometimes still offers it, but I'm like, but like I used to think of myself that way. And I had results, like if you're
thinking that, you're going to feel certain ways and do certain things. Yeah.
Right. And, I remember just being very embarrassed, too, that like I had married this guy just so he could get a green card. And like, what does that say about me? So
what does it say about you now?
Well, I used to think it said that I was a pathetic loser.
Yeah. Well, what does it say about you now? How do you see that girl now?
She had to grow up, and I say that lovingly. I don't mean it like,
yeah,
and she had some stuff that she, that I don't want to say prevented, but like, made it harder to be emotionally mature.
Yeah.
She
was just a little girl.
Yeah. And, she still exists inside. Right.
Yeah.
So, and it's like learning how to, it sounds so, cliche in a way, but like learning how to take care of her and me, us, taking care of us together.
Yeah.
And that meant making this decision that, like I had to swallow my pride or whatever in support of her growing.
Well, yeah, but isn't that interesting that like you had to do this when you say swallow your pride? I mean, yes, but that was probably like a good chunk of internal emotional work, but you had to do it to show up for yourself.
Yeah. And it's funny because I wouldn't have ever used any of that language until now. Like back then, I wasn't using that language.
Well, I don't know that there were words for a lot of this stuff. Yeah. I certainly didn't know any of these words 10 years ago, 100%. All right, so let's go on to the good stuff. kind of looked at what, the hard stuff. Your remarriage.
Yes.
How long have you been married now?
23 years almost. It'll be September 6th. It'll be of this year. It'll be 23 years.
Yeah. And his name is Tim. So
Yes.
I'll probably just refer to him as Tim. You met him not online, because online didn't exist then.
No, but it was online.
That's what I mean. I was like, but the word meeting someone online, met him on the internet, when it was just the internet.
Yeah, when it was, there was no algorithms and nothing, like no Facebook, swiping, no phones. Nothing.
Oh my gosh. So tell us about that. Tell us how and where you met Tim.
So the guy from Brazil, so there were like other ones kind of like him. No, I didn't marry any of them.
Yeah.
But there were similar relationships that weren't good. And I had a string of bad New Year's Eves because of these awful men. And I'd gotten a computer and a friend of mine came over and we were like, oh, what's this? Oh, America Online. Let's plug it in and see. So we like got online and
this is when he made the screeching sound.
Exactly.
To get online.
Modem.
Oh my God.
Yes.
The modems.
And there was this section on America Online called the Romance Connection. And it had like the infamous chat rooms. And it also had like the ability to post personal ads. But again, we're talking about like, it's like, I mean, in a newspaper, had a very limited amount of space, but really the only difference between like the online personal ads and the newspaper was that you had more room, but it was nothing different really. It was just like a newspaper ad, but on a computer screen.
Yeah. And
again, I don't even remember how they did it. I think it was probably partly by like, if you wanted to like just for Connecticut or New England, or I don't remember exactly how that worked. But anyway, so what I did was I posted a personal ad looking for a New Year's Eve date. And I said, and potentially more. And I listed like all the things that I was looking for in a guy. Like, I mean, I remember some of the things was like, professional, but not a stuffed shirt.
Wow. You were very specific.
Yeah. I said things like a man who likes to travel, but his heart is at home.
Oh my gosh. I love this so much because the worksheet that I do with my clients is a this, but not that worksheet.
Oh, cool.
Literally, that's the name on the columns of my program. I'm like, we want this, but not that. We want this, but not that. Because I experienced having a list and getting everything on my list, but it being awful. Because my first husband I wanted someone who was ambitious, but then he thought he was going to be a billionaire. That was like literally his ambition. And nothing in between was satisfactory. Right. So yeah, I love that. Keep going. Sorry. I won't interrupt you again.
There were a bunch of those things. And and so I posted it or whatever. And then this was in 1994 and it was early November, 1994. So again, giving myself a month and a half or whatever to get to New Year's Eve. Right. So, I started getting responses, lots and lots and lots of responses. In the end, like even after New Year's Eve, I was still getting responses to that ad. And there were like 250 responses. And out of all of them, I think I wrote back, and again, I don't have the exact numbers, but like maybe I wrote back to 50 of them. And again, it was just simply email. There was no matching or algorithms or any of that. You just like write back. And out of the ones that I wrote to, I think I spoke to maybe about half of them. So like 25-ish on the phone. And then based on how those conversations went, I met about 10 different guys. And again, I'm not sure if it was exactly 10, but something like that. And, we would meet and like have like a little date, like a daytime kind of date. And of those guys, some of them I was really into, but they weren't into me, or vice versa. They were into me, but I was like, nah. So then along comes Mr. Tim.
Yeah.
And we have this date. It was an evening date. And I remember like walking into the restaurant and he was there, and he was really tall, which is one of the things I wanted. And when he stood up, he like stood up. I was like, wow, he's really tall.
How tall is he?
He's like 6'4.5".
That's
like,
tall. Okay.
Yeah. And it's funny because we both joke that we were like, oh, this is interesting, but we weren't like, oh yeah, like it wasn't, neither of us were each other's types.
Gotcha.
Which is a good thing, I think, given that my type was
was not good for you.
Was not good for me. So and this was like, at this point, it was in November, probably late November, or maybe even early December at this point. And I remember I had a cold. I was very stuffed up. And I also remember that in the restaurant that we went to, which was like a very old, quaint New England inn, and they had carolers singing Christmas carols coming around to the tables. It was kind of embarrassing, but it was fun. And then we like stood in the bar afterwards, and like he put his arm around me, and that felt really good. And then I guess we went out, like when I was time to leave, he asked me if I wanted to come back to his place to play Scrabble. And I said, no. I'm like, Scrabble, really?
Is that the new line?
Well, we had talked about playing word games, because I think that was another thing. I'm like, I like word games.
Yeah.
But we decided to have a second date. I was intrigued enough to be like, And as I often have jokingly said, nobody better was coming along.
Right.
And I was like, it's getting closer to New Year's Eve, so I had to fix it.
But you were saying no one better for New Year's Eve. You weren't thinking no one better for like my whole life.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, all right, I guess he's going to win, because after the second date, I'm like, all right, you want to do this?
Yeah. Yeah. So you got 250 responses. Could you kind of break down? You said you replied about half of them. That's like 100 and something. How did you winnow?
I replied to like 50.
You replied to like 50. So from 250, you replied to 50.
Yeah.
And then you talked to
25, maybe.
About 25 on the phone, and then met up with 10.
Yeah.
What were the things that you were like looking for? Like as you went down, how did you like say no? What was that like thinking process around all the no's?
This is going back to my, like, I have to go way back in my memory.
I know, but it's so good.
I do remember like some people would respond very like, not like hardly anything, like, I'll go on New Year's Eve. I'll go out on New Year's Eve with you, like, period, nothing else about them.
It's like the profiles where the guy doesn't even fill out his profile.
Well, I don't even think they had profiles. Like, again, that's sort of like the point, is that there was no profiles. I think it was just somebody responding, and you get an email response. I don't remember the exact like technology.
Yeah.
So there was like obvious ones. I'm like, yeah, I didn't even bother to respond to them. And I guess maybe there were funny ones, or ones that just struck me as being like, oh, I'll write back to them. There was, I remember this one particular, there was a couple, a man and a woman, who wrote back and said, hey, we'll
go to New Year's Eve with you.
I don't think I want a threesome.
Oh my gosh. Like nothing's changed. Right. Like literally, like this is what, 1980 something?
94.
94. So this is like 20 years ago. Close, like 17 years ago.
It's more like 30 years ago. 20 years.
That long? It has been that long. Oh my God. Yeah, 94 is a little shy of 30 years ago. And it's still the same. People giving one-line answers, people wanting weird things, making weird offers. And I like, one of my theories is that it's always been going on, even before dating online. Like it happens anyway.
Yeah.
That's the way I think about it.
And then I remember very clearly when I was talking to them on the phone that, you pick up different things. And I remember actually one guy felt very creepy. And like he was like wanted to know more information about where I lived. And I don't know, it's like, again, this is where like paying attention to your gut and being like, my spidey sense is going like, no.
Yes. Yeah.
Something's
And
wrong with this guy.
right. And I think sometimes when you're in that desperation mode, that drowns out your gut, drowns out the intuition.
And something just hit me when you said that I didn't think of when we talked earlier. And well, I did say when we talked earlier that I had kind of gotten into this like devil may care, I've got nothing to lose kind of attitude. And it just hit me. It's like I had 250 guys. Like I'm no longer desperate. Like
yes.
Or couples or whatever, right? Like options.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about that perspective that like, oh, maybe like, oh, wow, look.
Yeah.
Out of all these.
100%. Like I love when my clients will like create a dating plan that includes dating online, dating offline, reaching out to their network, all the things so that you always have options. And like options are something that we always hope they will be created for us, but they never are. We have to create them for ourselves.
Yeah.
And literally that's the work. Like when people talk about the dating is work, there's some work you have to do. It's like starting a business. You're like creating this whole environment for yourself. And you did that for yourself. You're like,
yeah, very unconsciously, or you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's like, I mean, it's like, was this divinely guided or, like was some other force at work here? I don't know. Or anyway.
Yeah. I mean, so I studied engineering in college. So in my mind, there's a process for everything.
Yeah.
And your process, I'm like, I love this process. This totally works.
My husband's an engineer.
Yeah. So going back to him, you said he was different from the guys you dated normally. What was it about him? What were the things about him that was so different?
Well, interestingly, I was also thinking about his initial response to the ad, which was very well thought out and very genuine. And, he sort of like took each of my points and was like, talked about himself in that regard. And, he was, again, like just very genuine and very, I don't know, like it was intriguing, I guess, on some level. And so, we, after that third, what was the exact question you had? What was different about him?
What was different about him? Like his qualities that were different from the guys you dated before?
Well, I mean, I guess probably some of the guys that I've dated before were divorced, but I mean, he was divorced. He was 6 years older, had a steady engineering job. It was just very sort of solid. And he had 3 children from his previous marriage. And, again, like I don't remember exactly how he talked about his kids, but I think I got the feeling like he's involved, he cares, he's not a deadbeat, he's involved in doing and all those, all that kind of stuff.
Right. So it sounds like he was like, you were able to pick up on the fact that he was healthy. He was like a healthy, healthy exactly. person, which isn't a word that I used until after my divorce. I didn't realize that like there are healthy people, like 2 people can have the same characteristics and one be unhealthy and the other healthy. So like, when I was younger, before I got married, it was like you had a checklist, you're a Christian, you marry someone in the faith, I don't know, all the things, he's got to have a job or, and so, but there were people who had, my ex-husband had these qualities, but was unhealthy. And then there were people who had the same qualities and were healthy. But I didn't know the difference.
Yes, that's a very good way of like he was very stable compared to what I was used to.
Right. And it sounds like he was also emotionally stable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you use the word solid.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. And then you had said he did like little normal things for you. Like he did like regular things.
Yeah. So,
which is interesting. It's like, it's almost like a lot of times we have this like, oh, we want Prince Charming, we want the bad boy, but like the person you really want to live with. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so we ended up having the New Year's Eve date. Do you want to talk about that date, or do you want
to? Whatever you think is fascinating and interesting.
There's something, I mean, the date itself, the New Year's Eve date, we were going to go to New York City because I worked in New York City at the time, lived in Southwestern Connecticut. So it would have been like a, hour and a half train ride or whatever. But the weather was really terrible. And it was like, we didn't think standing out in Times Square watching the ball drop would be fun in that kind of weather. Plus I don't think he really wanted to go to New York City at all. But so we stayed in Connecticut near where I lived, and because he lived about 2 hours away from where I live. And at that point, I'm like, all right, it's New Year's Eve. We're going to be late. He lives 2 hours away. And I pretty much planned that he would spend the night. I mean, I didn't know what else was going to happen, but I was like, okay with that, having been on 2 dates with him already. And so we went out for sushi, which he had never had before. And me being in that devil may care, I've got nothing to lose. I'm like, here, I put this huge clump of wasabi on top of the thing, and I gave it to him. And I'm like, just put it all in.
Just put the whole thing in.
And he married me anyway, but like,
yes.
But it's like, I think I represented, like, if he represented solid, good man to me, I represented like fun and wild and different, sort of different, I guess.
Yeah.
And so, that we did that, and we actually then came back to my place and played Scrabble. I drank a little bit too much wine. And we did go to bed together, and we did have sex. And in the middle of the night, I woke up and I didn't feel good. I wasn't like puking or anything, but I had a little intestinal upset and just felt pretty crappy. And I was kind of like sweaty, and I came back to bed afterwards, and he wrapped his arms around me. And I'm thinking I'm disgusting because I'm sweaty and sort of sick. And he was like, I had just never felt that kind of care before. Really, like literally. I'm like, it still sort of takes my breath away when I think about it.
Yeah. It's like nurturing.
Yeah.
Like, are you okay? Like,
yeah.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like being taken care of.
100%.
Yeah.
And so, but what was funny is like, after that, we were like, started to like date, and because of his kids, and I would have his kids every other weekend, and other things, and the distance, we would see each other every 2 weeks. So the plan was he was going to come back after the big New Year's Eve date. We were like definitely interested in keeping going, and he had noticed that my stereo system wasn't hooked up right or something. So the next time he came to my house, he had like wires and I don't know, and he like spent however long fixing my stereo system so that it would like work with the TV and like all this stuff. And I'm like, that's the kind of guy he is. Like, that's how he shows, it's like, then there's the whole like love languages thing, right? Like acts of service, I guess. But he was like the kind of guy who would like fill my car up with gas or buy me a tire, or
Yeah. I love that. Like he showed you more so than words, which a lot of times women, we love the words. We're just like, and I think, and I don't know, there's just something about, we're so eager to believe that sometimes we'll believe with just words. We're just like, oh, words are enough. Sign me up. But he actually showed you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that. That's amazing. So you've been married 23 years.
Yep.
If someone asks, like I don't even know how to phrase the question. It's somewhat like, of course, none of us ever anticipates what the journey will look like, Right. But what has the work of marriage looked like for you?
Again, it's so fascinating thinking about from the coaching perspective and how powerful thoughts are. One of the things that was from the get-go, both of us believed that we have a good marriage. Like we believed that. And there were definitely times that were challenging. But I really truly think that it was like, we have a good marriage. Like it sounds so simple.
Yeah.
I didn't want it to be work, if that makes sense. Like I had sort of like going back to my mom, and like I remember her saying things like, it's hard work. Marriage is hard work. And I'm like, and she's been married 3 times. Like that's not dissing her, but like, it struck me like, oh, if that's what you believe, that's what you're going to get.
Right. Or there's a frame of reference. The definition of work can be different.
Yes. Yeah.
Like her definition, I thought I was working on my marriage really hard in my first marriage. The definition of work in that marriage was more like a torture chamber kind of work. Versus now we work at it, but now it's a lot more fun work. Like you said, we're happily busy in our marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, everyone is different. I think it's important to say that in my case, I never wanted to have children. Mm-hmm. And he didn't want to have more children, which was great. And so it was sort of like, phew, like I don't have, because believe it or not, I think at one time in my life, I would have had children because I was so desperate to be loved. I'm like, okay, so I think that the fact that we didn't have children together played into us having a healthy marriage, made it less work.
And that's a thing. That is a real thing. Children are their own special kind of effort that you have to have. And then it's a special kind of collaboration.
Yep.
That requires effort, that requires thinking, it requires, so yeah, no, I totally agree. Not that there's anything wrong with having children. It's just, if you're going to have them, be very well aware about what it entails and make a choice.
And that they're going to bring up all your stuff.
Yes, they do. They do bring up all your stuff every day. I keep waiting for that to end.
And being a stepmom certainly was like, I couldn't have imagined what it was like, even though I came from a background of having step parents myself and, being a step kid and having step siblings and all that kind of stuff. I, in hindsight, I can see where my trauma was playing out in that regard with his kids. And so, yes, there were challenges. And as there are in all marriages. And like, when I think about like the good work, it always required being vulnerable. It always, talk about like anxiety, right? Like, or I think maybe just because of my own frame of reference, like, is this going to be the thing that makes him not love me anymore?
Right. That's scary.
It's very scary. Woo.
Yeah. Because that's what we're all looking for, is to be loved. Yep. And then when you find that love, and then now you're in a situation where it's like, I do not have it together in this moment. And am I going to lose this love over it? Yeah.
So yeah, you just go through the hard parts and,
It sounds like there's just been a lot of growth, like almost like a continuous growth journey. And one of the things that I had on my list when I was dating was, I was like, a growth mindset. Because I think I was well aware that like, there's going to be like, and I was like, let me put it this way, I was aware that I wasn't going to be the same person for the rest of my life, because I had just started this brand new growth journey after my divorce. And I knew that whoever I was going to be with needed to be like there for everything I was going to become. And I didn't even know. I didn't even know what I was going to become along that journey.
I was not that conscious in the beginning.
We were a lot younger, to be fair. But that,
The time I married him, though, I was almost 35. So not a baby, but relatively young. But yeah, that's
so considering like, the fact that you've been a stepmom has brought up all your stuff, you've become a coach along the way. Like, who would you say you were at the beginning of your marriage versus who you are now? Like that, what's that growth delta in there?
I've actually used this this language before in some things I've written. I was a woman child.
Wow.
And now I'm a grown-ass woman.
Amen. Yes. Yes, that's so true. Because isn't that what trauma does? Like you have arrested development.
Yeah.
When you experience trauma.
Yeah.
And healing the trauma basically involves growing up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, again, in some of the coaching circles that we're both in, we talk about emotional childhood and emotional adulthood. Doesn't mean that you're like a child, like literally a child. You can be there's times I'm still in emotional childhood, right? But I'm more in emotional adulthood more of the time now.
And it depends on the area. You could be really solid in one area and then like in another area. Like I work with a lot of high functioning women who are like leaders and CEOs and like managers. And then they come home and they cannot say no to their kid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's amazing.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's like, as I said, I wasn't, I woke up somewhere along the way. There were probably several, waking up moments over the course of the time, where it was like being offered, here's an opportunity to wake up a little bit more. Yes. Do you want to keep doing it?
Yeah, so good. All right. So what is next? What does your marriage look like now? What is like because I know you've been married, quite a while. So of course, I'm sure there's been a ton of evolutions. What does family and marriage and that journey look like for you? What's next for you and Tim? What does your love feel like right now?
Well, he retired a year ago from his job. And I think given my example, he actually got a little coaching not by me, but by someone else, sort of around his decision to retire and what he would be doing next. And I thought that was actually a very healthy thing to do. Because, I have my work at home and, we had this sort of rhythm before, and now all of a sudden it's different. But, so that has been an adjustment, but it hasn't been hard. I wouldn't say like, oh God, it's been this big challenge. So he's sort of exploring what his life looks like now as a retired person. And, it's funny because I hadn't thought of this until now, but like all through our marriage, yes, we would take trips together and vacations together, but a lot of times we would do our own thing. Okay. And, I would go off to do whatever and he'd go off to do whatever. And we were always very comfortable with that. And I see that the evolution being more of that. We've also again, it's just sort of noticing what it feels like to get older. He's going to be 65. I'm going to be 59 this year. He's going to be 65. Yeah, I guess that's about right. And just the changes that, and I don't know if they happen to everybody, but you're you don't want to travel as much. I mean, and obviously given the pandemic and whatnot, it's different, but it's, and then he's got his kids and some of them have their own kids now. Yeah. So there's that. And they all live sort of scattered. So it's not like they're right around the corner but yeah, it's, I guess it's sort of like more of the same.
More of the same. That's what I was about to say. I was like, it sounds like you guys figured it out early. And now you're just like,
Yeah,
this is who we are. Yeah, I love that. I love that it's not because I think people sometimes put themselves in this box of what it looks like. It looks like us doing everything together. It looks like it looks like what your parents look at, but it sounds like you guys like, well, this is who I am. I have all these interests and you have all these interests. And then we have this part that overlaps and it sounds really healthy.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember hearing this advice or whatever. I don't know, maybe it was somebody gave this advice at our wedding, but it was something like a healthy marriage isn't about building your lives around each other. It's about being part of the building of each other's lives. Something like that.
That's right? Kind of cool. Right. And the premise there is that each person has a life.
Exactly.
To start with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Karen, thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself.
Thank you for having me.
I know, like, I hear so many women's stories and they're all different. And I know a lot of women feel like they're alone in like one part of their story. So I know like there are parts of your story, like, how many women want to come out and say, hey, I got a divorce because
I'm a pathetic loser.
Because I married this guy and was going to let him get a green card.
Yeah.
And we all know that it's happened to so many people. And, I just appreciate you sharing that because I know there's going to be a listener or multiple listeners who are going to be like, oh, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And like
100%.
That feeling is so healing, just to be like, oh, I'm not alone. And I'm human and I'm worthy, even though this happened.
And, it's always such a huge honor to tell my own story. And it's like every time we tell our stories, whether it's on a podcast or to your best friend or to a stranger on an airplane or whatever, right? There's healing that happens in that.
Yes.
So thank you.
Oh, no. Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate it. Please tell the listeners where they can find you online. Spell out your social media handles. We will also have it linked up, but where can they contact you if they want to do some of this work?
My website is KCL Anderson with an O. So KCLANDERSON.com. Awesome. And, given my age, I'm like mostly on Facebook.
Listen, I say Facebook is where the money is, but that's just me.
And I do have like, I have like a professional pages or whatever, but like just friend me on like my regular, if you're interested in friending me, that's where I'm at. Wonderful. And I do also sometimes post on Instagram, but I don't do reels or stories. So
like, listen, you're not going to catch me dancing on Instagram.
But
thank
yeah,
you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much. And
all right, everyone, make sure you follow Karen on Facebook, reach out to her on her website. She does amazing work with trauma. She does amazing work with mother-daughter relationships. I have multiple copies of your books because I had bought your books before reaching out to you to work with you. And then you sent me another set of them. So I have multiple. My daughter will probably, when the time comes, be like, yeah, I have trouble with my mom. Let me go get that book off her shelf. So her books are on Amazon. Reach out to her. If you want to work with creative anxiety, a mother-daughter relationship, boundaries, she's the woman for you. Thank you for your time and attention today, everyone, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening today. If you are ready to get married after divorce, I want to invite you to download my free 8-video training specifically designed to help divorced women date with ease and get married again. Head over to SadeCurry.com to get started. That's SadeCurry.com. I'll see you inside.